Friday. I'm Derrick Day, and he is.
I'm Aaron Tomlinson. Happy
And we,
Thanksgiving, everybody. Late Thanksgiving.
yep,
Thanks.
happy Thanksgiving. I hope everybody ate good, had a good time with family, and all of that. Um, I know I did. I'm still working my way out of a food coma. I don't know about you. uh,
We we went we traveled this year. We went to spend some time with family. So they did all the cooking. So they sent us home with a few leftovers, but that's one thing I'm gonna miss is all those good Thanksgiving leftovers.
yeah. Well,
So
I smoked a brisket, which turned out to be probably my magnum opus
oh
of,
man,
of briskets. Yeah.
awesome.
So it turned out really, really good.
Good deal. I'm gonna share this while I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't know why the chat isn't showing up. Is the chat showing up in your window?
Uh it is showing up, but it's not showing any comments yet.
Yeah, yeah. For me, it says no internet. It's got like a little dinosaur where it says no internet. So I can't see comments. So any comments, I'll have to lean on you for that.
Okay. Sounds good. If they start showing up, assuming they do.
Yep. So anyway, we've got a great topic tonight. Here's the thing: whenever we get into the mind of Aaron, I think that we get into some really interesting things. We start getting into some things that start peeling apart the layers of ourselves, and we get down to what we've called our best authentic selves.
Yep.
So, with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to you, Aaron, and you tell us what the topic is. Oh, before that, we got to talk about what's in the glass.
Oh
What are
yeah.
you drinking?
Yeah. So I picked up this Mondavi or Mondavi Robert Mondavi red blend.
Ooh,
Aged, it's aged in a rye barrel.
okay.
So yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it tastes like most red blends.
Well, sometimes it's just like, okay, it tastes good, and that's all we need, right?
Yeah, that's
So
why.
I'm doing this Owens Craft Mixer with cranberry and lime, and it's actually carbonated in the bottle, which is sweet. I happen to like carbonation in mixed drinks, and I'm using this Lukasova potato vodka,
Yeah,
and
good
I,
stuff.
I I got a thing for potato vodka, man. It's just a special place in my heart. But
Yeah,
anyway,
once you have potato vodka, there's no going back.
it really isn't. It really isn't. It's totally different than grain vodka, and I mean, just
It is
yep.
better
So,
flavor.
so anyway, man, tonight's subject.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about last couple of days about the stories that we tell ourselves, and so I'll start it off this way. Anybody that's ever studied anything about NLP, neuro linguistic programming, one of the first presuppositions or first things they teach you in NLP is the map is not the territory, and that's a phrase that comes from a Polish person. So we got some Polish vodka in the house. So Alfred Korzybski wrote a book about this big in the 1930s called Science and Sanity. And it's a lot of it's about linguistics and the linguistic map that we create. So when he's saying the map is not the territory, he's talking about the language that we live by. And the point is that we map out our interpretations of our reality. That it's not the territory out there. In other words, the actual experience of the experience. But we have experiences, and then we interpret those experiences by giving meaning to them. And then we make our decisions and act based on our map, not based on our territory.
Okay.
And I love that metaphor there. So the idea is Science and Sanity is the name of the book. So the idea is the more closely your map is accurate to reality, the more sane you are. But also the more empowering your map is. In other words, does your map help you get to where you want to go? So many of us use outdated maps. So for example, in the early 2000s, they completely redid our downtown area. They redid the streets and everything. They put in a river walk in the city in which I live. And if I were to use a map dated before 2000, I wouldn't be able to get anywhere downtown.
Okay.
I would be completely lost. I'd keep running into obstacles. I'd be driving my car into a river, literally. Uh, so the idea is that we come into life independently of our maps. Our maps are created for us as children and become like a preset programming that we then respond to life based on those maps. The problem is that what worked for us when we were 8 or 9 or 12 or 15 doesn't always work for us when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes we find ourselves using outdated maps to relate to a territory or a reality that's completely different. And so one of the ways that we create our maps is that we tell ourselves stories. We become a character that we play. Other people become characters in our
Mhm.
stories. And we can either tell ourselves empowering stories that help us get the life we want, or we tell ourselves disempowering stories that then lead to lives that we don't want to experience. And, or most of us are a combination of all those different things. So we can have many different narratives running depending on the context that we find ourselves. So for myself, uh, I'll give two examples. So this really affects our ability to make money. This really affects our ability to how we relate to the world of finance and currency and money and that sort of power exchange and all that stuff that happens. And so my map was early on, I was raised in a family that owned a quite successful business.
Mhm.
So I was born into that sort of business mentality and mindset, not working for money, but selling for money.
Yeah.
Um, and then it all came crashing down when I was 16. Won't go into all the details of that, but it all came crashing down. And literally overnight went from uh, riches might be stretching it. It's all relative compared to everybody or a lot of people in our community. Most people in our community, we were wealthy, but compared to CEOs of major companies, the Rockefellers or whatever, we weren't
Yeah.
couldn't even touch that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's all relative. But we went from riches to rags, literally almost overnight. We went from our nice house on this estate that we had to literally living in a double wide trailer with rats and mice and cockroaches and all that comes with that almost overnight. And so the story that I told myself was kind of a big FU to the system and to money in general. So really adapted this sort of minimalist story
Mhm.
early on, but also a very disempowering story early on. And so my relationship with money has been awkward to say the least, but it's been awkward because of the stories that I've told myself, which have
Mm.
either empowered me or in most cases disempowered me, prevented me from being able to maximize some of my talents or take advantage of opportunities that were out there, right? So that's one example. Another example of a disempowering story, obviously, is the story of religion, right?
Yep.
The very fact that you need a savior is disempowering. The very fact that you give up your authenticity and self to a book. But there's a story that you tell yourself. I'm a sinner saved by grace. That's all part
Mhm.
of the story,
Yep.
or whatever. And so, one of the things that I was able to do was I didn't feel beholden to the narratives of religion that were around me necessarily. And so, I began to tell myself a more empowering story. I began to focus on, which at that time was the story of Christ in me. And by the way I would identify Christ in me, because Christ is one of those really slippery words, right?
Mhm.
People throw around Christ consciousness, all that stuff. But the way I would identify it was the untapped human and or divine potential that was resident inside of me. And so I was able to flip it from a disempowering story, sinner saved by grace, to an empowering story that says I have this wealth of divinity inside of me. I wonder
Mhm.
what we can do with it. but you still had that disempowering story kind of hanging out. Like those two weren't bedfellows. And then I was also telling myself a story about other people,
Mm-hmm.
about the LGBTQ plus community, about
Mm-hmm.
other religions, people of other faiths, people that weren't like me. They were less than me. I had the truth. I had the good. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have it. If they would just listen to me or be like me. So there was a superiority element to the story that I grew increasingly uncomfortable with. And that led to deconstructing the religious story. So now, after you go through deconstruction, there is no more religious story that you
Right.
can tell yourself that makes any sense. So then you have to come up with a new story. And just the fact we've kidded about this, and I've kidded with Kyle about this, but we refer to ourselves, don't do it as much anymore, but for a long time there, referred to ourselves as former pastors.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the story. I was a pastor. I deconstructed. Everybody thinks I'm public enemy number one in the religious community. See how I'm telling myself a story?
Yeah.
And then I can take that public enemy number one and I can create a pity party story. I can create a woe is me story. Then I begin to isolate myself from people and from community. Based on that story, it becomes a disempowering story. But the map is not the territory. So.
Yep. Yeah, that's and it's funny you talked about like the maps and when we're dealing with an outdated map that leads to misdirection, right? When you feel lost, I think that it's imperative for you to re-examine your map, right?
Yeah.
To say, okay, is my map up to date? Or like, for example, I have one car that gets updates from the internet. So the GPS mapping is always current. It's the latest and greatest. It comes from Google Maps, and that's great.
Yeah.
I have two cars that have navigation. One, basically, you can download an update and put it on a thumb drive and plug it in, and it'll update everything. And then another one that if you're going to update the maps, you have to buy new DVDs, right? Because it's a DVD-driven map system. So the one that's on the DVDs, that mapping is really outdated. It goes back to 2014. And it's produced some weird results in navigation to the point where I tell the kids when they drive the car, don't use the car navigation, use your phone. So again, if you feel lost, it's probably because your map is outdated. You haven't received the latest download, or you haven't put the latest patch in or whatever, and now you're somewhat confused. You had an idea of where you were going, but you don't have it really fixed in place. And then as for the stories that we tell ourselves, like I tell everybody that my story is I grew up poor. We weren't poor. We couldn't afford the OR, and poor, we were just poor, right?
Right.
And that's the story. And I talk about, my mom raising 3 kids on her own, and that's part of the story. And so, like you said, you could turn that story into a woe is me story. Like, oh, I didn't have any advantages. I didn't have any help or whatever. But what I did is I decided to turn that narrative around into a story of hope, into a story of empowerment. And I said that in spite of what statistics said that we were going to wind up as, that my brother and sister and I are all college graduated professionals, and we're all doing well. And that's the empowering part of it. And then also, you were talking about the Bible, and I'm going to go to another one that's near and dear to us, and that is the whole American exceptionalism.
Oh yeah. That's big.
And so for years, I said, I'm where I am because I pulled myself up from my bootstraps. I took the initiative, and built my life. The Horatio Alger story, right? That I built myself up and made myself who I am. But that's not exactly true, because you can tell yourself that story, that and on the surface it seems very self edifying and self gratifying, but it's really not true, because nobody is truly self made. Everybody has help. Everybody has somebody that poured something into their life, contributed something into their life, or otherwise helped them get to where they are. Nobody just, I did it. I built, that like those stickers they put on gas pumps, he built this, no,
Yeah.
I am the result of many minds, many hands, many hearts. I am the product of that. And so now that's the story that that I tell myself, but it's also the story that I share with others, is that yes, there is a part for you to play, that there's some things that you have to be incentivized to do, but at the same time, your movement creates opportunities. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't necessarily mean that you automatically go through the door, even though you've done all the preparation. You're there, you're ready. Sometimes your preparedness takes you to a door of opportunity through which someone has to reach out and pull you in.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm really obsessed about, when you talked about this as a subject, is how do we help people change the narratives that govern their lives? Because there are two things here, right? One is that the stories that we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What am I saying to me? And then the second thing is, what do others say about me? And here's the thing, that for everybody listening, that when someone else says something about you, you and you alone have the license to either accept that narrative or reject that narrative, or to even alter that narrative if necessary. Because let's just say that in some cases, the narrative may be partially correct, or it may be mostly correct. And then you have the license. I want you to know that you reserve the editorial right to alter that story to suit you, right? But if the story doesn't fit you at all, because I've had people say to me, well, you're lazy, you're not worthy, you're not good enough. And if I accepted those stories,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be in a world of hurt today. But I chose to exercise my franchise to reject those stories that were not consistent with what I knew to be true about myself.
Yeah.
So that's my.
Yeah. So I'll just pick it up with that, the how to, like, how do we do this? I think the first step is to realize the map is not the territory. The
Yep.
story is not the story in that sense. And what I mean by that is that we're all creating meaning. We are the meaning makers. We are the storytellers,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. And it's interesting that the word authority comes from author.
Author. Yeah.
And so, I always tell some of my clients, if let's say, like you said, people called you lazy or called you worthless or
Yeah.
whatever. There's people that grow up in environments where that's the story that they're given from their primary caregivers, mom and dad, or foster mom and dad, or whoever those primary caregivers are, grandma, grandpa, whoever it is.
Yep.
A teacher could tell you a story. You'll never be able to amount to anything more than fill in the blank, right? And so what happens is that we end up letting other people be the authors. And that's why, religion is so dangerous, but not just religion, politics, anything that's memeing, right? That's it's just a copy of something else that's out there. Anytime I'm surrendering my power as the author of my story, then I'm giving other people authority over me, and then they begin to tell me the story, and
Yeah.
that's who I am. That's how this is supposed to be. Statistics tells a story about who you should have become.
Yep.
But you didn't allow the statistics to author your story, to have authority over you, which is why, I really advocate, don't let anybody have authority over you. Go to people for advice, but don't ever put that person in a position where they have the power to author your story. You can borrow parts of it, say, oh, I like that, I'm going to put that in my story.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I'm choosing to author my own story. And so I think and this is hard for people. This is hard for people that have had it rough. It's hard for people that have been told a lot of victim stories and bought into a lot of victim stories. And here's the other thing, Derrick, we confuse our story with how it really is. We think that is the truth. We think that is reality. I was, in your case, born Poe, and I was born without privilege and advantages and opportunities. That is true, but you didn't let that become your story. It's interesting that you bring in the American narrative, because there is that sort of American story that, the American dream. That's all part of the American story. We can all live the American dream if you just apply yourself, if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and all that stuff on a certain level is empowering. Because here's the difference that I see. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yep.
You got two stories.
Yep.
You got two stories. Poor Dad telling you how to live life, and Rich Dad telling you how to live life. And if you want to boil it down to one core statement, at least for me, from my reading of it, which was many, many years ago, poor people work for their money, whereas rich people make their money work for them.
Yep.
So now the question becomes, what's the story that I'm telling myself? Because anybody can invest. Anybody can invest. Now, whether or not it's a good investment or a bad investment, I mean, you can save. I don't want to say anybody. I know there are people that are less privileged, but man, you could cut out your Starbucks habit and take your $5 a day that you're spending on a cup of coffee, and at the end of the year, you're going to have what? I can't do the math off the top of my head. $1,500, let's say, right?
Yep.
Well, take that $1,500 and make it start working for you. But my point is, if I'm telling myself a really disempowered story, if I don't play the character of a rich person, or a potentially rich person, or a rich person's son, or a potentially rich father, or whatever the case may be, if I don't have room in my story to be that character, then I will not fulfill that. So opportunity literally will be staring me in the face, and I will act on my map, not the territory. And I'll let other people, that's for somebody else. I've come up with all kinds of great ideas that were timely, and I sat on them. Way to watch other people take those same ideas. Not that I gave them to them, but they were just kind of floating in that's how ideas are. They kind of just in the collective unconscious, or whatever we want to call it, the ether, whatever. And I can think of 3 or 4 times that I had cutting edge ideas, even when I was in religion, cutting edge theology, but I didn't do anything with it because, that's not going to be accepted. That's not mainstream. What if I'm wrong? I confessed, I think last week, I can't remember if it was here, but on one of the things I was doing, I said, I have never written a book because I figured the books are just going to sit in my garage, and I'm going to say I wasted all that time and money. That's a story. There's no reality to that. There's no substance to that whatsoever. But because I'm telling myself that story, I have prevented myself up until now from possibly, who knows, what could have happened if I would have taken some of those ideas. So I feel like I'm rambling, but hopefully what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to boil it down to this. If you want to change your story, you can, but not until you accept that you are the author of your story. You are the meaning maker, and you can, and these stories have no basis in reality at all. They're just stories. And so you can decide, do I want to keep living the story that was given to me for other people that I'm writing? I'm just letting other people dictate to me how I'm writing it. Or do I want to get some creative ideas and start writing my own story and see what happens?
Well, I think that another thing that we need to talk about in writing your story is two things: character development and plot development, right?
Mm.
And I always think about this like Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy is one of my favorite authors, and he wrote stories that were so immersive, right? That the story is that the CIA would come to visit him kind of on a regular basis.
Wow.
The CIA and the NSA, because the things that he wrote were things that, the average layman, the average author should know. And he was not a military person. He wasn't part of the intelligence community, but he had some creative insight. And so he was able to build these immersive worlds. And then I think about like Robert Ludlum and the whole Bourne trilogy, right?
Right.
That Jason Bourne becomes this character that, even though he's something that's far beyond any of us, we identify with him.
Right.
We basically merge our consciousness with his. And we're immersed in the character. And what am I saying by this is that how you said, you can't let other people become the author of your story. And this is important because whatever the story is, if the story is compelling, you're going to get immersed in the story. And one of there's a benefit and a problem associated with this. The benefit is that if you identify with the story, you get immersed in the story, you're really in the story. And so you begin to follow the emotional trajectory that the author is creating for you. But the problem is that if you get so immersed in it where you can't separate fact from fantasy.
Yep.
And now you're all in and you begin to think you're Jason Bourne, right? And you go out and do a whole bunch of stupid shit that winds you up in a bunch of legal trouble because you've immersed yourself in this in a negative way. So and so going back to what you were saying about religion, and this was something that was really huge for me, because when you fall into the trap of spiritual father, spiritual son, spiritual father, spiritual daughter, spiritual mother, blah blah blah, all of that whole thing, right?
Yep.
You're giving over, you are abdicating
100%.
the right to your story to someone else, and they begin to define who you are. And what happens is that because you place a certain amount of trust in that person to to handle the affairs of your spirit, that you begin to accept whatever that narrative is. And I'll tell you something, this is man, this was a really hard one for me, because I remember the first time that I got the left foot of fellowship from a church. Right? And it's the opposite of right-handed fellowship for y'all that know anything about church, right? Yeah. Aaron knows where I'm at, but the first time that happened to me, it was very emotionally, it was emotionally painful, because I felt like something that a part of me had been torn away from me.
Yeah.
And when I go back and I look at it and I really analyze the whole situation, nothing was really ripped from me. What happened was, and this was actually a good thing, is that I was separated forcibly from a narrative that I had accepted from someone else about me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So to your point, don't let people author your story. Don't give them authority, right? Over your life, because when they have authority, then that means that they're the ones authoring. And you have to understand that you are the captain of your own ship. And I have to use an analogy here, a Navy analogy, because and this is a saying, this is like a literal saying in the Navy, that the skipper of a ship at sea is accountable to no one but God.
Hmm.
In other words, he is the final, or she is the final authority,
right,
on everything that happens on this ship. Ships have movement schedules, what they call ship's movement, and that's classified where the ship is going or where it's going to be at any given time. The skipper has the authority to alter that pattern.
mm-hmm.
Now, they will have to give some account to the fleet admirals at some point, but the skipper has the authority to
Mm-hmm.
alter the ship's plan. And so when I say that you're the captain of your own ship, that means you get to dictate your movements, your ports of call, your provisioning, and your navigation. You dictate 100% of that. Now, to something you said earlier, Aaron, you can have trusted advisors that you go to for advice. Now, let me say this, because this is really important, and I'll shut up after this, that when you take advice, be careful of whom you accept advice from, because if you're taking advice from someone from where you have been, that advice is only as good as an old map. But if you take advice from someone who is where you're going, or is headed in the same direction that you're headed in, then that's someone who can give you advice. In other words, if you want to be a millionaire, you're not going to take financial advice from someone who can't manage their savings.
Right. Yeah.
And so again, the two things that I want to focus on here are character development. How are you building your character? What are you writing about yourself? And oh, there's one more thing. I'm doing a Baptist close now.
That's good, man. Keep going.
Is that I remember years ago, I got into this thing called NaNoWriMo, right? It's National Novel Writing Month. And it's actually this month of November, and this is the first year I think that I haven't participated in it. But I've written, several novels, not to completion, but one of the things that I found, and my wife, she's a very talented writer, and one of the things that she would tell me in writing, she said, let your characters sort themselves out.
Mm.
In other words, you write them with a certain amount of autonomy, and that you're not dictating what they do. You're writing the situations, you're writing the metaverse around them, but they're making the decision. And that's really that sounds kind of hocus pocusy, but it really is. And so when you look at yourself, you have to realize that, hey, the situations and circumstances are the backdrop
Mm-hmm.
of my life, but they are not the defining characteristics. I alone maintain the autonomy and the authority to act upon those situations and circumstances. But story development, right? How am I building this metaverse?
Yeah.
What elements am I adding to it? And we have to make sure that as we're telling stories to ourselves, that we are building accurate, edifying, encouraging storylines, and then constructing our character development accordingly.
Yeah. So a couple things. Going back to the first part of what you said, this is how cults work. This is how every gang works. This
Yeah.
is how political movements work. This is how religions work, because so many people don't have a good story. They don't have a good story.
Mm.
They don't have an empowering story.
Yeah.
And this is why conspiracy theorists will never be persuaded by facts, because what we do is we start a story, and then we tend to distort facts to fit our story, or at least interpret facts in light of our story. And if we have no story, then a cult leader comes along and gives us a story. You're
Mm.
part of an end time group. I saw a thing. I had a lot of time off this last couple of weeks, and I just relaxed for a lot of it because I needed to. And I watched this documentary about David Koresh and all that mess that happened back in I guess it was the 90s now, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So a lot of people too young on here probably don't remember that or know about that. But David Koresh, his story was he was an end time prophet. He was the end time prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And he became literally the voice of God to these people. Jim Jones, same thing, right? He became the voice of God to these people, but he gave them a story that appeals to people who are disenfranchised, who feel disempowered because of the systems and the oppression of the systems that exist. And it's interesting that both David Koresh and especially Jim Jones, I'll highlight Jim Jones, maybe not David Koresh. I might be getting my stories confused, but I know Jim Jones for sure.
Yeah.
Coming in around the time of the civil rights movement.
Yep.
And he had a lot of mixture in his group.
Yeah.
He was kind of on the cutting edge. We've said the most segregated place in America is Sunday morning.
Yep.
And he was offering a story of integration, but offering an identity that says we're integrated around the fact that we are sort of God's end time army. We are the Antichrist system is going to come for us.
Mm-hmm.
We are God's end time army. And when people bought into that story, they would, let David Koresh sleep with their wives, or let Jim Jones talk about committing suicide. And that's the power of these things. And so that's why I'm saying, like, people. So I want to do this in a sensitive way. Rightly or wrongly, a lot of white people in America did not like the story that they were writing. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
They were writing themselves a powerless story. They were writing themselves a story of affirmative action prevents me from getting that job that I'm more qualified for. The American dream since Ronald Reagan has become an American nightmare. I want to blame Reagan for that, some of his policies, but this idea that I can go on and do better than my parents, and my generation found out, I don't know, Derrick, I think you're like on the tail end of the boomer generation, right?
Yep.
And I'm smack dab in the middle of Gen X. So, I'll just speak for Gen Xers. Like, we didn't, a lot of us, do better than our parents. And so we had a set of expectations, and then it was much harder for us by the time we hit trickle down economics.
Yeah, you know what the definition of trickle down economics is, right?
No.
Shit rolls downhill.
Yeah. So I'm speaking as a white person who came from privilege and then had it hard, right? So there was this powerlessness story that we were telling ourselves. And then you layer on top of that, I didn't feel this way. I never felt this way, but I'm speaking for my people. So I'm gonna be careful. I'm trying to really tread lightly here. But you right on part. You get fed this story that of the American dream. Forget about the Native Americans. Like, manifest destiny is the story I was told. Forget about the backs of African American slaves. we highlight what Abraham Lincoln did to end slavery and forget about the tussle over the economics of slavery.
Yeah.
Uh, so we have this sort of American story that is very white and proud and whatever. And now all of a sudden, immigrants are invading our borders and taking our jobs. They're the ones that are destroying the economy. White voters are becoming less and less numerically significant in elections. So we're losing our power, we're losing our grip.
Yep.
And that's why I can't succeed financially. I can't succeed. So see, I'm divorcing myself from my story. My personal responsibility for how I'm authoring my life is what I mean by that. And I'm saying it's the illegal immigrants' fault. It is this Black Lives Matter group that's coming up that's trying to destroy the nuclear family.
Yep.
It's the black vote is what's mattering in elections now, not my vote. And so I begin to feel disempowered. And when I feel disempowered, I look for a savior.
Yeah.
So in steps, and God forbid a black man just won the presidency, not just for one term, but for 2 terms.
Yeah.
And he was coming for our guns, and he was gonna, destroy our health care. He was Hillary on steroids when it came to health care. And all that stuff becomes part of my story. And so because of my story, not because of reality in America, but because of my story, I feel disempowered. And so here comes a figure like Donald Trump, who is the white billionaire who has all this power, who has a powerful persona. He's always wearing the red ties.
Yeah.
Carl Jung predicted Nazi Germany because he said when the masses feel disempowered, when they feel shit on, they will transfer to a powerful figure, a savior figure. And so here comes Donald Trump. He's going to make America great again. I mean, that statement, when you think about the circumstances in which that statement was created, of course, the Tea Party movement came along before that. And I feel like I'm rambling. But what I'm trying to say is, if a person gravitates to that story, and now all of a sudden this political figure is my savior, this political figure is going to change my circumstances. This political figure is going to save us from people coming across the border. He's going to save our democracy. Then I become, it's no different than a gang. It's no different than, taking people that are in really impoverished, oppressed neighborhoods where they come from abusive families and saying, we'll be your brothers. We got your back. You're a part of something bigger than yourself. See, they're offering you a story. David Koresh, you're part of this end time army. Jim Jones, you're part of this end time example. But the others, they're coming for you. But I'm the one that has the answers. I'm the one that can save you. Yep. Conspiracy theories already embedded into us that we can't trust our institutions. We can't trust, there's this evil other out there that is the reason that I am where I am. And so when COVID happens, of course, I've already bought into the story of the deep state. I've already bought into the story of how Donald Trump is the savior, and they've been persecuting our righteous guy with all these, impeachment hearings and the Mueller report and all that stuff. So of course, this is here from the deep state, Anthony Fauci's deep state. I hope this doesn't get edited. I hope that didn't just hurt the algorithms. In other words, what I'm saying is, could it just be that pandemics happen once every 100 years? Could it just be that we were due for something like this? Could it just be that the world has viruses and that we can't control Mother Nature? That's not the story I tell myself. The story I tell myself is there's this evil deep state that's out to take out Donald Trump and his presidency. There's this evil deep state that wants to control me and take away my freedoms. So of course I'm having to shelter in place. I'm having to wear a mask. So see, I'm having to take a vaccine. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the facts and making it fit my narrative rather than adapting my narrative to what's actually going on. And so then I become, to use your illustration, like Jason Bourne. And I'm completely disconnected from reality. And I already bought a religious story or a spiritual story that I'm on the side of good, I'm on the side of light, I'm on the side of that's going to triumph, but there is an evil other. The reason I'm not triumphing, the reason I'm not prosperous has nothing to do with me. I'm I,
Right.
it has to do with this evil other.
Sometimes the righteous are going to be persecuted, right?
Exactly.
And that's one of those things that I said this. I wrote an article about this, that basically the editors of the Bible put in some safety valves, right?
Yeah,
Because
right.
they understood that people are going to get smarter, that eventually literacy is going to become more widespread. They understood what was coming. And so likewise today, people know that Christianity is on the decline, that religion overall worldwide is on the decline, that people are basing their decisions more on logic and reason than they ever have in the history of humanity. So they
Right.
know this, right? So what do? They amp up the story. They amp up the volume of the narrative. And so this goes back to what Voltaire said, that those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, right? Uh, not basically the whole Christian narrative basically paves the superhighway for conspiracy theory,
Yes, it does.
because it's like, okay, you're believing that there's this magical sky dad out here, and he saw that humanity was all fucked up, and so he decides at the right time, I'm going to send my son into the world, and he's going to preach and teach, and they're going to reject him, and he's going to sacrifice his life. Okay, so this is the overarching narrative, right? So
Yep.
in the span of what is encompassing the whole Christ narrative, you have to have these little Christs in interspersed. But the little Christs are all false Christs, right? The Hitlers, the Mussolinis, the Koreshas, the Jim Joneses. What was the guy the Raelian? You know the people that thought that this comet was gonna.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I can't even
yeah,
remember. But yeah, I kind of remember that. What was that called?
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it was called the Raelian. That's what I think that's what they were called. But
Okay.
you have all of these mini Christs, and they're all saying that basically uh, society's going to hell in a handbasket because knowledge is reigning supreme over faith, right? And so now you need to believe what I'm saying. You need to accept this narrative. You need to accept this metaverse and then adapt your character.
Yep.
You need to start telling you. In matter of fact, it's not even enough for me to tell you a story about yourself. What I have to do is I have to teach you how to tell the story to yourself, because your voice is the most credible voice, right? And that's where this really gets interesting, because again, like, you could tell me something and that's fine, but if I internalize it and then begin telling myself the same story, the most credible voice that any human being has is their own.
Yes.
And when you tell yourself that,
Mhm.
now you're all in. You're all in. No matter what any other evidence out there says, you're all in. So all of these things about conspiracy theories, that it's basically you have internalized the voice of someone else. You're speaking this own narrative over yourself, but you have to understand where it's coming from. That this narrative comes from people who see a shift in what is happening with humanity,
Mhm.
and so they tell you, don't trust knowledge, don't trust information. You have to just simply believe this story, and
Yep.
you have to internalize this, and not only believe the story, but you have to tell this story about yourself, and you have to share this story with others so that they too can share the story with themselves. And that's the whole QAnon thing in a nutshell, right? It's like everybody, the people that buy into it, they're not just buying into. I mean, this is a whole way of life that people embrace and tell about themselves.
Mhm. So what's interesting, what comes to my mind is, oh God. Okay, I'm going to tread lightly again because I'm going where angels fear to tread, as we used to say. um, hmm. I just got to preface. I have really strong feelings about our education system, and that's where I want to go for a minute because we get a lot of our stories from the education system.
Uh-huh.
And I come from a family of teachers. I love teachers. I think most teachers are saints because they are performing an incredibly important function to us as parents for our children, and they're getting paid shit to do it.
Yep.
Having said that, though, there is an issue with state-sponsored schools, and here's what I mean. Much of our education that you and I grew up in, at least, was focused on obedience and conformity.
Yeah.
We're going to tell you what's important. If you break the rules, you're going to go to the principal's office and you're going to be punished. I mean, there's such a premium placed on obedience to the system.
Yeah.
Even how well you do on our tests is going to grade you. And then we're going to start in school already pigeonholing you, putting you in the proper place, right? So I'm
No, listen.
but here's the thing, but it's state sponsored, so it makes sense to me. Doesn't this make sense? If we want to maintain the power of the state, then we want the people that have the most interaction with our children to craft a certain story for them.
Yep.
That centers specifically on obedience and conformity and these hierarchies so that we can perpetuate them for future generations. Whereas what I would advocate for is a different story that says every person is intelligent in their own way.
Right.
Everybody has a song to sing, if you will. Everybody has a dream to live. Everybody has a story to, however you want to, say that stuff. And our job as an educational system is to discover your uniqueness, discover your unique talents, your best abilities, and shape those and forge those while at the same time honoring your individuality and uniqueness with respect for it. I'm not saying, it's just an anarchist free for all, but with respect for other people. Like, why aren't we developing programs that specifically caters to athletes who are very intelligent in their bodies?
Yeah.
Half the shit they can Google when they get older. Let's help them develop those talents and abilities. Other people, engineering is their thing, or other people, music is their thing, or other people, you see what I'm getting at? Emotional intelligence. How come we don't teach emotional intelligence? Because the entire state-sponsored school system is state-sponsored. Yep. And so it plays its role in giving us those stories in order to perpetuate the status quo.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Like some years back, I worked with some super intelligent guys. It was a team of engineers, and we're working on a big government software project. And so we spent a lot of time talking to each other about different things. Like we figured out that the entire population of the world with 6 square feet of space each would all fit into Jacksonville, Florida.
Wow.
So the whole thing about the world being overcrowded was a myth, because you get 6 square feet. Now, granted, that's not a lot of space, but everybody would fit, right? Mm-hmm. And but one of the things that we talked about, we used to talk about education a lot, and so we talked about this concept, and I don't know if it was original to anyone in the team or if it was something that was adopted, but it was called the mastery concept. And that basically you do away with the grade system, K through 12 kind of thing. And that basically people move from one area to the next or one level to the next based on their mastery of the information. Now, to your point and what you're saying, that would add another layer to this that I think would make it even better. Because if you say, okay, everybody gets some level of physical education instruction, right? Because we all need to understand how the mechanics of the human body, right? But there are some people that are going to express that in greater manifestations through baseball, through basketball, through football, soccer, or whatever. And then music, like you said, music, that's another thing. uh, Everybody gets some instruction in music, but then there are some people that, hey, this you see the gift, they are going to be musicians. Or STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right?
Yeah.
That some people are going to be skilled in these areas, and so you take them and you cultivate that, you identify these particular areas. And you know you talk about conformity, right? And this is a big thing because we talked about this last week, and that, like, you know, empowering your children to question authority,
Yep.
to question what they're being taught.
Yep.
Because see, that's the whole thing. We have to do away with the whole notion of conformity, because so basically, instead of saying let's foster conformity, let's foster collaboration.
Yeah.
In other words, how do we use all of these disparate parts to form a greater whole? But it's not like, you tell me what to say and I just have to accept it. That's bullshit, right? And anybody that falls into that trap, let me put it this way: there are no successful conformists.
Boy, that's the truth.
Zero.
That's the truth.
Zero. If you look at anybody who's successful, they are successful because they have gone outside the norm. They've thought outside the box. They've gone outside the system. They've done something that they were able to go outside the accepted paradigm and produce something that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's what produces success. So if we want to produce successful people, we need to tell them the story and have them internalize the story that you are not a cog in the machine.
Derrick, let me just hit on this because I think it's really important. This is where I'll end up probably.
Okay.
Um, so what we're saying is that you are the author of your own story. You've got a story that you're telling yourself that's either empowering or disempowering. If you
Yep.
want to really change your life, do the inner work, find out what story you're telling yourself, and change that story, right? Look at it from a different perspective. How can I look at this as an empowering story versus a disempowering story? But I want to stress to people that you also are a character, albeit a supporting cast
Mhm.
or an extra in other people's stories.
Right.
And this is where the tension comes. Because if you start authoring your own story, there's going to become tension between the character you're becoming and the character you're playing in other people's stories.
Ooh.
And this is where the fight is going to come.
Mm.
So if you've played the dutiful soldier, if you've played the role of the dutiful soldier, you've always conformed, you've always followed the rules, you've always made sure that you did your duty, whatever that was, to the people around you. And you start authoring a different story that says, I don't want to be the dutiful soldier anymore. You start offering a different story and living that out. Now all of a sudden you're out of character. You're the director in other people's movies are going, cut. You're off script. And I can't have you off script, because if you're off script, that messes up my story.
Right.
So let me remind you of who you are. And this happens as in an individual level, in families, right? And so what happens is you the people that you have allowed to author your story begin to try to take that authority again and push back on you. And because your story is uncertain, I lived very certainly this story of the Christian pastor who was impacting the world and moving the needle for Jesus and super important and changing lives, which gave my life meaning and value. Now all of a sudden, no, I was the guy that got sucked into that. And I'm not playing that role anymore. Whoa, wait a minute. You play a very important role in my life because you help support my story going. And now you're no longer keeping my story going. Now you're no longer playing the role in my life, in my movie, in my book that you're supposed to play. And so I've got to rewrite it for you. So now here comes the pressure. So if you're going to do this, you've got to be able to honor your own authenticity at the expense sometimes of other people who are trying to pressure you to fit their narratives and their stories. After, and then, you know, this happens at macro levels too. And I'm just going to say this: after George Floyd was killed, most of us looked at that and said, finally, something needs to be done about this problem. And you had protests that were very interracial. And so the powers that be said, no, we got to change the story. We got to build a story about BLM as the problem. We got to highlight these things that we know will be triggers for people. Like this whole thing that they I'm going to go off on a thing, but you know, BLM wants to destroy the nuclear family. People that are offended by that are people that grew up with apple pie and baseball in the rural areas like I did. And have never sat down and talked to, like I have, because I work at a university and I've got several opportunities to hear the stories and the circumstances of people that grew up in inner city Detroit, that grew up in inner city Chicago, that grew up in inner city Denver, and their family units didn't look anything like mine. And so somehow if I set mine up as the icon, if I set mine up as the plumb line, now all of a sudden yours is somehow not up to par because you didn't grow up with mom and dad and your sisters and visiting your extended family at Thanksgiving and Christmas. You grew up with your grandma and your uncle who was dealing drugs and your cousin who was a little bit crazy and your grandma and your mom, and you never knew your dad. So somehow we say that isn't a family. And so the whole, at least it's at the way I hear it and understand it, what BLM is coming along and saying is it's all family. Let's honor family regardless of its constitution in order to create more empowering stories for people who grew up in less fortunate circumstances. And by less fortunate, what I mean by that is they didn't have access to the same resources that I had access to, for example, growing up. So it took 3 families and their income to keep a household going. You see what I'm saying? So there's so much pressure out there. The end point, what I'm trying to make is on a micro level and a macro level, when you start saying, I'm going to write my own story, you got to understand you're playing a part in everybody else's story, and you're going to experience all kinds of systemic pressure. And the people who make it through this process and the people who don't are the people who stand strong and firm on what you said. I'm the skipper. I'm the captain of my own ship. And so there has to be a certain level of defiance in you if you're ever going to be able to author your story the way you want to. And that's where I'll give my Fifth Baptist close.
No, again, the thing that I would challenge everyone who's listening to say is that, like, again, you made this point early. I really want to hammer this home, that the etymology between authority and authorship is close. And that if you surrender your authority, you effectively surrender your authorship. And that means, again, what you just mentioned, that you create this tension now when you go outside of what is expected of you, and because you're the main character in your story, but you're a supporting character in someone else's, but you've broken the fourth wall, right? And now you're saying, okay, no, this is actually what it is now. um so we you have to be very careful to manage your story, control your story, and that when your story expresses itself in someone else's, right, that someone else needs to accept what my wife was teaching me about writing, about character
Yeah.
development,
Oh
that
man.
your
Wow.
character has the right to
Yeah.
determine their own destiny, and you have to be prepared as a writer to give them the autonomy to do that. So if someone else is the bit is a player in your story and they change, you have to be prepared to give them the autonomy to change. You
I love
can't force them to follow your script. They can't force you to follow theirs. And uh, lastly, the metaverse, the story, the plot, the setting. All of these things are things that are under your control in your story. Now, granted, there are some things that, like, you can't control where you're born. You can't control where you grow up. There are a lot of things you can't control, but you can control absolutely how you react to your environment.
Yeah.
You know, so basically the setting, like, again, I grew up in inner city Detroit
Mhm.
in the Dexter Finkel community, and and I had just my mom raising us. Now we had, my grandfather, my grandfather was an interesting story. I'd like to do a show just on him.
That'd be great.
My grandfather was hilarious. But I had uncles, and we had other parents in the neighborhood. We had the village, right? But the thing is that statistically, a lot of us who, that we were products of single parents, that we grew up in this particular neighborhood, statistically we weren't supposed to make it. And
Right.
and you decide whether or not I'm going. Basically, you can either accept the narrative that says that you're not going to succeed, or you can change that narrative and say, something, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to study. I'm going to partner with others. I'm going to do things that are outside of what is expected of someone in this environment, so I can do this. But again, um, to close on your point, Aaron, that we have to be prepared that when someone else rewrites their story, and they are a character in your story, you have to give them the autonomy to do that. And
Yeah.
likewise, you should have the expectation that people will do likewise. And sometimes that'll work, and sometimes it won't. There will be tension in all cases, but sometimes the tension will be minor, and sometimes the tension will be great, and you'll have to learn how to manage that. And
Yeah.
that's where I stop.
Yeah. Can you see comments at all?
No, I cannot see comments at all. Let me.
Okay, so I'll go through some of them. C. Rodriguez just said she didn't get the alert. Henry Harris says Aaron is awesome black man.
Aaron is black as shit, man. I don't care what anybody says.
Trapped in a white man's body. I've many times. Let's see. Ben Urban says exclusive religion is a lifelong exercise in self-hatred, self-disregard, self-depreciation, and self-ignorance.
All of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above.
Jeanette Pacheco, sometimes you don't recognize the new door without help, for sure. And
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I wanted to highlight this too, what you said about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, that none of us are where we are
No.
individually because of individual effort. C. Rodriguez, not everyone has the right to speak into your life. Amen, sister.
Amen. Amen and amen.
Um, Ben says there's very few moments of ecstasy, quite like.
Damn,
Sorry,
yeah.
let me do it again. There's very few moments of ecstasy, quite like proving people wrong when they've placed a cap on your potential and achievements.
Yes. I'm going to tell a story, right? I had two uncles, my mom's brothers, and my uncle Bob was very edifying. And today is his birthday. He would have been 81 today if he were alive. Um, and Uncle Bob, he taught me so much about life. I mean, I could say that a lot of who I am as a man, I owe to my Uncle Bob. Now, Uncle Bob was very edifying. He's very encouraging. My Uncle Drayton was not. He
Yeah.
was not very encouraging, not very edifying. And it's funny because like my grandfather, I had kind of a love-hate relationship with him, but we reconciled everything before he passed on.
Mm.
But I remember one time, and I'll never forget this, that he told me, and we were getting ready to go and visit my dad in Minnesota, and I was 15 at the time, and he said, "Oh, you're going to visit your dad, huh?" Yeah, we're all excited. Me and my brother, we're excited. And he says, "Well, I just want you to know your dad ain't shit. And because your dad ain't shit, y'all ain't gonna be shit either."
Holy shit.
And I was like, you know, I had some things that I wanted to say to him.
Yeah.
And when I became an adult, I reminded him of these things because I held on to that. And I was like, you know something? You said I wasn't going to be shit, and here I am.
You have your ecstasy moment, Derrick.
I had that moment. Now I'm glad that he and I, kissed and made up before he passed on, and that's
Sure.
great. But again, if I had that was a pivotal moment in my life, and I recognized it. My 15-year-old self, I got it because
Yeah.
I said I can either be defined by this,
Yeah.
or I can completely defy this.
I love that. Love that.
Yeah. So
Henry Harris says, now it's time for everyone to sow a seed.
yeah, my Cash App is Derrick E. Day, by the way. I don't know, Aaron, if you have a Cash App, but
I do, but I can't rattle it off. Maybe I should.
yeah.
I love that. I guess that means he liked it.
Yeah, I told Henry in a private chat yesterday, as we were chatting on Thanksgiving Day, we got to have him on. I think that's going to be a raucous good time.
I'm embarrassed about my Cash App because it's obviously a throwback to a different time, a different story, a different version. But it is what it is. It's Aaron T. That's with two A's. Aaron T. 777.
Ah.
So I am definitely good ground for seed.
Well, mine used to be Bishop D Day. That was
if you'll sow $777.
Yeah, $777 or $77.07.
You are going to unlock the key to the treasures within you, and new stories are going to begin to just emerge in the night. You're going to have dreams after you sow that seed, and you're going to see in the night seasons what your life is to become, and that's going to be the magic key right there.
Okay, Aaron, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn that around into an R&B thing, right? And say yours is 777. I need to change mine to 9311, right? And then we have a Morris Day song, 777 9311.
Hey, that's perfect, man. That's absolutely perfect. Henry says, he's killing me. You're killing me, Henry. He says, keep talking. God is touching people's hearts to give. There's a direct link. Jesus said, wherever your heart is, there your treasure will be also. So there is a direct link. There's an invisible cord between your heart and your phone and your cash out. And if your heart is really moved and really stirred, then you will put in, if you have to rewind the video to find Derrick Day's cash out.
My.
You will contribute.
If you sow that seed of $777.93.11,
all right,
that you will unlock the blessing.
So I just got to tell people on a side note, any money that comes in is going to be used. Not, and this is the truth.
Yeah.
Not to enrich either one of us.
Nope.
We talked about this. We're going to start a Derrick and Aaron like party fund. So that whenever we can do one of these in the same location, we can have smoked brisket, we can have the best wine.
Yeah.
So
if scotch, cigars, all of that stuff.
If the Lord is speaking to you right now to donate, I just want you to know exactly. There's no pretenses here. You will be contributing. So if there's anybody out there, okay, so on a different note, if there's anybody out there that wants to contribute to the Derrick and Aaron Party Fund, and you would like to see us be able to do some live episodes where we're really sitting down and smoking cigars and eating some of that, magnum opus smoked brisket, preferably in the summer when we can be enjoying Derrick's swimming pool. You can contribute right now, and just know that you'll be funding that episode and keep it on the air.
That's right. You will help.
That's the truth. That's where it's going to go. I'm just saying.
It's the absolute truth that you will help elevate this program to a higher level. That we will reach more people, and not only that, we will enjoy ourselves even greater than we do right now. And you can actually be a part of that.
Yes. At some point, we'll find a more noble cause, but at the moment.
I think that's about as noble as it gets, man.
I think it is too. I think you would help us reach more people with great content. I mean, you guys show up every Friday night. I mean, you could be doing anything. You could be having sex on Friday night. You could be doing
listen, come on, man.
These two guys, provoke thought and have a conversation. So I do believe in what we're doing in all seriousness. So appreciate everybody that watches and shares and all that stuff.
Yep. Grateful. We are grateful for each and every one of you. And
Jeanette, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Okay. Sorry to interrupt your gratitude. Jeanette Pacheco Peasley, she says, replying to I can't too many things coming through. But anyway, she says, where is it? Where'd it go? Henry Harris, Jesus' first miracle was water to wine, party. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we get together, we're going to turn water into scotch. And do you know, fun fact, right, that the word whiskey actually means living water.
Ooh.
This is a true story, true fact.
I did not know that.
Whiskey literally means living water. So, I always said that, hey, that's what Jesus really meant, that when you get together, it's like you're going to share some water.
Taryn Jerome Harris says, I chose to rob God tonight. You thief and robber, Taryn.
Well, hey, it's like you could be a thief and a robber from God because at the end of the day, really, God doesn't really give a fuck what you do with your money because He
True.
doesn't exist. But Aaron and Derrick do.
Right.
we care. We care deeply.
I don't know. I think we need to hire a marketing department. I don't think we're doing very good, Derrick. Maybe we should hire Henry Harris to be our
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
charge of our marketing department. All right, man. I love you.
All right, love you too, man.
Comments. Nobody jumping in. Not a lot of comments tonight.
It's Thanksgiving,
but it is Thanksgiving, so
we'll get people on the replay.
Yep.
But I think this is a good subject it'll help a lot of people. But
yeah, I hope so. Right on. Okay, so with that, we have a new
closing.
What is it? I can't remember.
Thanks for coming to our TED Talk.
Thank you for coming to our TED Talk. And if you know Ted, throw our names his way.
There you go.
Laters.
All right. Love y'all.